Over the last number of days, there's been a barrage of publicity about the opening of the cause of Sister Clare Crockett, this sister from Derry. And something that was coming to me in prayer was to ask the question, what spirituality formed this woman? If you look into the spirituality of the home of the mother and look at the key, one of the top three aspects of their spirituality is the defense of the Eucharist. If we're wondering or looking to see, how this woman develops spiritually, you cannot uncouple the fact that this woman defended the Eucharist. It is a key aspect. It is the number one aspect of the spirituality of the home of the mother. They also have defense of the Blessed Virgin and her perpetual virginity, and a focus on youth, winning youth for Christ. But the Eucharist is the number one part of their spirituality, the defense of the Eucharist. And so Sister Clare, not only, if Sister Clare would have lived this spirituality, lived a life of sanctifying grace, obviously, if defending the Eucharist is a key aspect, then living a life of sanctifying grace is extremely important. The availing of the sacraments, confession, etc., etc. When we look in this book, on page 307, you can see Sister Clare receiving the Eucharist. My ask to those that love Sister Clare, those that have been inspired by Sister Clare, why not follow her example? Why not follow her example in the sense that if the Eucharist is actually the body, blood, soul and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ, as we believe, why not show an outward sign of respect that what we are receiving is very different to any other piece of bread that we eat? This is a different level of eating. This is divine union. And for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, saints of the church and laity of the church have been nurtured by receiving communion on the tongue. East and West, most of the Catholic traditions did this. You go to the Orthodox, they receive on the tongue. The Roman Catholics received on the tongue, kneeling, if you could kneel, obviously. Obviously, if you can't kneel, nobody's expecting you to do the impossible. But it was a sign of devotion, it was a sign of respect. And yet, over the last 60 years really, less and less and less importance has been given to the Eucharist, to such an extent that, and this is just a reflection, that most people that go to Mass don't understand who they are receiving. We're asking ourselves, well, why is there a crisis in the church? Because we've inverted things. We no longer teach the faith. And so since we no longer teach the faith, people don't know. There was a program on earlier this week. I don't watch RT, but somebody mentioned it to me. There was a program on earlier this week where they were talking about funerals and eulogies and so forth. And I went on to RT Player to listen to it. And there was actually an atheist guy there on the program. And he made the most sense, kind of saying to the Catholics, well, get your act together. And, why is there such confusion about funerals and eulogies and so forth? Because people don't understand what a funeral is. That's simply it. In the Catholic world, they don't understand what a funeral is. I mean, where I grew up in Meath, they don't have eulogies. The priest will do a homily. When my father died, it was a friend of the family, Father Mark, who said the homily. He also said he also buried my father, and he buried my aunt as well in Trim. So, we were kind of guided and supported by in the funeral with a friend of the family. And really his homily, because he knew us, really served as the eulogy, in the sense that, it was somebody very close to us giving the homily. But it's just a small example of the confusion that has come up into the Irish Church. And in the midst of all this confusion, we have this Derry woman, Sister Clare Crockett, who's been formed by a spirituality, and the number one of the three aspects of their spirituality, the number one aspect is the defence of the Eucharist. Sister Clare only received communion on the tongue, and she knelt for communion. We see it if you go to their houses, they will bring out a kneeler so that you can kneel for communion. I remember years ago in the Opus Dei, when I was visiting them once, they also at Mass, they brought out a kneeler for communion. It's the simple things that I suppose I'm gonna launch out into the church. If you admire Sister Clare, why not follow her example and renew and defend the Eucharist? The defence of the Eucharist is for all Catholics. And I'm giving this message really up to Derry. Why not the Diocese of Derry, you be the leaders in renewing the Eucharist, catechizing the Eucharist? In the Long Tower, beautiful church, absolutely splendid church, you have this amazing altar rail. Use it. Give out communion from behind the altar rail, allowing people to kneel and receive on the tongue, as Sister Clare Crockett did. And I think if she was alive, she would encourage this. I know it. She would encourage the sacraments. She would encourage. It's not just receiving communion that's important, but also preparing ourselves to receive communion. Do we go to confession? Do we examine our conscience? Do we forgive? Are we prepared to receive our Lord? And so that the action of sanctifying grace works in us and we are transformed by grace. The life of Sister Clare, you see this gradual transformation to union with God through her life. We see this in her writings. And, we have an example of Sister Clare for our times, this saint of the Eucharist. And just think about it. She is a saint that's been transformed by the Eucharist. And I really do think that she is a light for our times. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it, Kairos Acutis, documenting all the Eucharistic miracles. Well, Sister Clare, her life was devoted to the defence of the Eucharist because her spirituality had that as the number one aspect. Also, that other Irish sister that died in the home of the mother, Sister Ruth. Now, she has that amazing story of the Eucharist, that she remembers as a child. There's no coincidences here, guys. Our Lord is working silently in the church. And, I think it's something that we should do. I'm always impressed when I go home to Meath in our local cathedral in Mullingar. They thankfully preserved the communion rails and they used them. At Christmas, when the bishop is celebrating Mass and he's giving out communion, he's going up and down the communion rail, which was the traditional way that the priest would give communion, so people could kneel down. And even when I was a child, in Meath, I still remember us kneeling down at a communion rail. And all of a sudden, the church changed and the church emptied. How we lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi, and the church changed and our church is emptied. I really encourage people to read this book on the life of Sister Clare Crockett and understand her call to the defence of the Eucharist. Because we cannot separate Sister Clare from her spirituality. which is beautiful. It's a beautiful spirituality, in my opinion, so badly needed for our time. It's and by doing that, if, for example, Derry Catholics, you become the leaders in renewing the Eucharist, defending the Eucharist in Ireland, what blessings are you going to bring on you as a diocese that will transform Ireland? Again, if it was good enough for this girl to kneel for the Eucharist and receive it on the tongue, and she is being considered for canonization, she is a servant of God, why not promote this out into the church? Anyway, God bless you. Take care. Bye bye.